Greetings all. Welcome to this installment of our free course on the Vijñāna-bhairava-tantra. Now we're on verse 51, which is directly continuing from the previous verse, verse 50. And in fact, this is a continuation of the same Yukti, one might say, providing a different context for the same Yukti. So let's explore verse 51. Yathā tathā yatra tatra dvādaśānte manaḥ kṣipet pratikṣaṇaṃ kṣīṇa-vṛtter vailakṣaṇyaṃ dinair bhavet. Wherever you may be, whatever you may be doing, continually keep your attention on that upper limit, the Dvādaśānta. As mental agitation dies away, something indescribable may occur within days. So that's the translation I had before. Now I'm actually changing it to be a little bit more literal, and also maybe it matters, this subtle difference. So I'll give the alternate translation now, which I already posted in the Facebook group. Wherever you may be, whatever you may be doing, keep casting the mind, the attention, into the Dvādaśānta in any and every given moment. And the rest is the same. As mental agitation dies away, something indescribable may occur within days. So the difference in these two translations, and these two possibilities are reflected in the other translators' versions as well, is, are we being invited to continually keep the attention on that Dvādaśānta point throughout the day, insofar as that's possible? Or rather, that we keep throwing our attention to that point in any and every given moment, meaning to say as many times a day, preferably 100 times a day, as a kind of micro-meditation. So in the first instance, we could call this a second attention practice, and that's a term I got from Cole Martins, the Trika teacher. And second attention means to do a practice while doing whatever else you're doing in everyday life. So keeping your attention on the heart bindu, let's say, or just any form of awareness that you're cultivating while you're doing everything else that you're doing. And indeed, if you can maintain unbroken second attention for a good chunk of your day, it really does radically alter your experience of reality. As the verse says, something indescribable may happen, meaning a sort of indescribable shift in your state of consciousness, if you can maintain this second attention. And again, that term coming from Cole Martins, to mean that it's not your primary attention, it's your secondary, your background attention, and yet you're cultivating it and maintaining it. So you're doing whatever it is that you're doing, washing the dishes, walking down the street with the dog, playing with the child, and you're keeping your awareness on that point, whether it's the heart point, whether it's the Dvādaśānta point, or whatever form of second attention practice you're doing, because there's many, many different varieties. So, for example, keeping the visualized or felt image of the goddess above your head, as she is now, but actually maintaining awareness as a felt sense and or visualization of the goddess in her light body above your head. That's another form of second attention, one of many forms. So then the question here is, are we being invited to make this second attention continual, which is certainly quite a practice. It can take months and months of practice before you get unbroken second attention for even, an hour or two. Or are we simply being invited to pratikṣaṇaṃ in any given moment? Just as soon as you think of it again, you cast the mind, that is to say, actually here, the faculty of attention, to the dvādaśānta point. So this is undoubtedly much more doable, and perhaps we don't have to choose one or the other interpretation. Perhaps you practice this casting attention to the dvādaśānta point as many times a day as you can, and then with practice, you are experiencing unbroken second attention for whatever period of time. But in terms of what the original author intended, I come down more on the side of this second interpretation. Why? Because we have the verb kṣipet. One should cast, or one should throw. Like when you're throwing a ball towards, like in that French ball game that you see a lot in France, where they throw the ball towards a specific point. You would use this verb in Sanskrit, kṣipet. One may cast or throw or toss. Toss what? The faculty of attention. Where? To dvādaśānta. When? Pratikṣaṇaṃ can mean moment by moment or in any given moment. Right? So that's the source of ambiguity there. And then we get this phrase, yathā, tathā, whatever one may be doing, yatra, tatra, wherever one may be. So it is very explicitly taught here as a practice you do while going about your everyday life. And indeed, in the commentary, we get the phrase, Shivopadhyaya says, swarasoditena yena tena samvit prasarana prakarena, which means in the context of the arising of one's innate rasa, that is to say, the natural flow of consciousness, in that context, one should do this practice. So that's a sort of fancy and elegant way of saying allowing spontaneous flow in your day, allowing consciousness to spontaneously flow into whatever actions arise through the course of your day. In that context, then do this practice. So let's just take a moment to note that for this verse and for the previous verse, the commentator is adding sort of contextual information, which we can take on board or not as we see fit. Because if you'll recall, in the previous verse, which is about sitting and meditating on this dvādaśānta point, whether it's the Shakti dvādaśānta or the Shiva dvādaśānta point, right? Meditating on that point, the commentator said, gave this context of when the body is pervaded by the deity that is consciousness, fully pervaded all the way from the middle out to the pores of the skin, then do this practice of meditating on the dvādaśānta. Now, why is he adding this contextual detail? I don't know, but in the previous video, I suggested that this is, just his own invention, and I want to give it a little more credence now. A couple of you wrote to say how actually doing it that way made the practice work better. Sort of filling the body with consciousness and then focusing to the dvādaśānta point. Now, having said that, I do think what the commentator is saying is not that this is a practice per se, but that in that context of being able to experience consciousness pervading the whole body, that's when this practice of Dvādaśānta meditation will work. I think that's very much what he's saying. And perfectly well could be a valid insight of his own, or come through oral tradition, oral transmission. So now in this verse again, then he gives this additional piece of context, because he's talking about, he says, swarasa udita, in the context of the arising of one's innate essence. That is to say, samvit prasarana prakara, the mode of being where there's a natural or spontaneous flowing of consciousness. Meaning to say, he's arguing that if you can experience spontaneous flow, right, instead of a kind of mind-driven, agenda-driven day, as most of us experience, if you can experience spontaneous flow, that consciousness is spontaneously flowing into all your actions one after the other, in that context, this practice will be effective, he's arguing. Again, we can take it or leave it vis-a-vis what the commentator is arguing. But I think regardless of whether your day feels like spontaneous flow or a jagged series of challenges, you can still do this practice. You can still just begin to explore second attention. And I invite you to do so. I've experienced great, really indescribable benefit from second attention practice, weaving your tantric practice throughout your day, right? So we're going to come to, there's actually more verses to come on second attention practices. But this one is nice and simple. Just as many times a day as you possibly can, cast your awareness to this Dvādaśānta point. And I'm recommending this Shakti Dvādaśānta point at the uppermost limit of the physical body. And with practice, you can also then feel into and put your attention at this upper limit of the energy body, which, remember, is 12 fingers above the crown of the head as a default location. So I think it's better to start with Shakti Dvādaśānta and work your way to being able to focus at Shiva Dvādaśānta. And indeed, that is the mode that the text recommends, right? That we should use, that we should start with Shakti and then go to Shiva as a general principle in the text. Okay, so you might remember in the previous video on this Dvādaśānta meditation, I said if you're not really feeling this point, you can do this extra technique, not given in the text, but highly effective in my experience, where you whisper a mantra into your fingertip and then take that fingertip and tap that Dvādaśānta point, and then focus there and feel the energy there, right? So that can be very helpful, right? But in this second attention version of the practice, ideally we don't need to rely on that. You can just keep returning your attention there. And let's be very clear. This is not about a method of yogic escapism. Otherwise, we would be calling it primary attention. We're not saying wherever you are, whatever you're doing, withdraw from the world and put your attention here. That's not what we're saying. It's exactly the opposite, in the sense of that you are still engaged in whatever you're doing. In fact, your primary attention is on doing the dishes, walking, playing with a child, whatever it is. But you're also cultivating this subtle awareness, maintaining that subtle awareness, that attention there. So give that a try And it can take some practice, right? That when you remember the Dvādaśānta as you're going about your day, you don't give it primary attention, you give it second attention. And I'm curious to find out what this is like for all of you. I'd love to have shares in the group. You can comment on the post I made about this verse. And the reason I want to invite this experiment and these comments is because, well, look, the verse promises us something. As vrittis, as mental agitation or mental emotional churning dies away, kṣīṇa, something indescribable, vailakṣaṇyaṃ, something extraordinary may happen within mere days. So quite interesting, right? The text is not saying, the scripture is not saying, you got to practice this for months before you see any results. It's saying, no, if you're really assiduously doing it, you're going to see results in days. In fact, something extraordinary could happen. So let's see if that's true. Tantrikas, go ahead and do the practice, do the experiment, and see what happens. And I just want to add that second attention practice during the day is more effective if you do this same practice as a formal seated meditation at the beginning of the day. So what I invite for the next few days is do the Dvādaśānta meditation at the beginning of the day, sitting down with full focus, and then do a second attention practice here and there throughout the day. And let's find out if something indescribable happens for you. Thank you once again to all of you participating so enthusiastically in the Facebook group, Tantric Yoga Now. I can't actually keep up with all the discussions at this point. It's so vibrant and active. Thank you to the patrons on Patreon whose generous financial support makes it possible for there to be free content for all. And indeed, this Vijñāna-bhairava-tantra course will continue and will in-depth explore all the verses of this phenomenal scripture. And I anticipate over 100 videos before we're done. So stay on board, stay with the journey. Don't worry about keeping up, right? Explore at your own pace. Om.